This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of Masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 505, entitled Masculist Op-Ed, freely distributable. Description. This flyer contains the text of a 900-word op-ed entitled Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, that I invite anyone who wants to spread it or publish it to do so, and freely. It gives a succinct and pithy summary of the main ideas of masculism. Masculist ideas have now matured enough for op-eds on the topic to be written and to be widely distributed so that the masses become familiar with masculist ideas, so that millions of men can be liberated from manslavery, etc. Now the flyer itself. A masculist op-ed, freely distributable, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Masculist ideas have now matured sufficiently that it's now possible to write op-eds based on them. This flyer is an example. I've written a 900-word op-ed for my local newspaper and will submit it. Since most newspapers are now controlled largely by monoconscious feminists, it's questionable whether their femo-mafia mentality will cause them to block it, the way that Susan Wojcicki, CEO of YouTube, promotes feminist channels and deletes masculist channels that makes her the most hated woman in the manosphere. But there is a strength in numbers, in the sense that if a copy of this op-ed is sent to hundreds of different media outlets, then even if the chance is small that an individual outlet publishes it, then with a large enough spread, the odds of at least one of them biting is higher. So that way the snowball can start rolling. It's my experience that once an article on a new topic is published, other journalists tend to jump on the bandwagon, arguing that, quote, "Oh, that's new, and it's been published, so I'd better react quickly and report on it, or this train will leave the station without me," end quote. So what I propose is that if you like this op-ed and think that you might be able to get it published, distributed, taken up, etc., in your local paper, student newspaper, your university blog, etc., then feel totally free to do what you want with it. The idea is to spread the masculist ideas in this op-ed to a wider public. You can download it for free from the following link: profhugodegaris, that's all one word, .files.wordpress.com/2022/masculist-op-ed.docx. What I'll do now is include the text of this op-ed in this flyer, and we'll also video it, as I do with all my masculist flyers. So here it is. Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an op-ed. Masculism is the obvious male equivalent of the word feminism, that is, men's lib. Masculism's core idea is that it is a rebellion by men against working for a woman, for decades of a man's life, being a manslave to her. Masculists argue that it was men who liberated women by giving women science-based medicine, the pill, household gadgets, higher education, etc., so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century. So masculists place powerful moral pressure on women to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, which is the opposite of a fluffy, a masculist label based on the word fluff for a traditional woman who expects to live off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him for decades. Masculists argue, quote, "Now that women can work, they must work. Anything else is manslavery and hence a war issue." End quote. Masculists make a close historical analogy with Negro slavery in the US in the 1800s, which was considered such a moral abomination by the abolitionists that it was the root cause of the US Civil War. Masculists claim that manslavery is a much bigger problem, since in today's world there are several billion manslaves. Masculists estimate that about 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 choose to become fluffy crappers by choosing to study economically useless majors at high school and college, thus making them fluffies as adults, who then go looking in their 30s for some gullible, manslavable man to work for her, so she can raise her children in a middle-class house that he pays for. Masculists are particularly hostile to what happens to one father in 4 in what the Masculists label as the fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system, which will rip his kids away from him with a 90% probability, give his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, force him to make payments for his kids, whom he will barely see. He will lose half his wealth and half his stuff to her, and if she is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay for her for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to fip up, so she continues to parasite off his money after the divorce as she did before the divorce. Masculists are so enraged by this that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and have children, choosing to live the MGTOW lifestyle, in brackets, men going their own way, thus crashing the birth rate and wiping out whole populations, thus making these fluffy feminist controlled family court lawyers and judges indirect genociders who have to be stopped. Masculists thus aim to create a FIP society in which young girls particularly are socialized by parents and educated by teachers to be FIPs, so that they share equally with men the burden of earning the living. Masculists claim that women in fact oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades. To Masculists, even rape is small beer compared to women's decades-lasting parasitical manslavery of a man, or women's paternity fraud, in brackets, where the husband is not the father of her baby, or women's pill lying, where a woman lies to her boyfriend/husband/partner that she is taking the pill, but isn't, gets pregnant, then by law forces him to work for decades to pay for a kid that he never wanted in the first place. On the political front, Masculists want the establishment of gender equality committees, that's GECs, in parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is far from being the case today. The masculist half of these committees will push for new masculist laws to counter the above problems that so plague men's lives, namely legislating the Op-Tab, that's OPTAB, that is obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to counter paternity fraud, and legislating the PARER, that's PARER, paternity rejection right, to counter the pill lying problem. If the woman then continues with the pregnancy after paternal rejection, she takes, by law, full financial responsibility for the kid. If she's a FIP, she can. Women already have the MARER, that's M-A-R-E-R, maternity rejection right, commonly known as the abortion right, so have the legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy, but men don't. The fact that women have the MARER but men don't have the PARER is the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women, but against men. Masculists argue that by creating a FIP society, the divorce courts can be made men fair, custody of kids can be made joint by default, alimony is thrown out, there is no halving of wealth and stuff, since the basic assumption is that both parties in a divorce are FIPs, so that, in quotes, no one owes anyone anything. Masculists feel that masculism will force women to grow up, to FIP up, to take full responsibility for their own lives and not be dependent on men for their livelihoods. Masculists see gender politics consisting of three major historical pillars: the pill, feminism, and masculism. The pill enabled feminists to become female careerists, and female careerism frees men from being manslaves to women, allowing men to have more time to do what men want to do, thus liberating them, which is what masculism is all about. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Then there's a photo of me and the author. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis is a retired computer science professor who specialised in artificial brains. He grew up in Melbourne and lived for half a century in 6 other countries. He is pretty much the father of masculism, having coined the term in the early 70s, and has given the ism most of its concepts and labels. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com, in brackets, contains links to 500 plus masculist essays/videos. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 500 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.